Oh, it finally happened. And the Federal Reserve has realized that they're being played by the government. Wait, what? Isn't the Fed the government? No, the Fed's actually supposed to be independent of the government. They just operate on the authorization of the government. They're still all suits. Either way, how did the Fed just realize that, oh man, we're getting played? And why is that a big deal? Well, remember, the Federal Reserve tells us there are 3 things that we need to see fall for overall inflation to go down. We need goods inflation to come down. We got that. That's already happening. We need housing inflation to go down. That's already happening, not in the owner's equivalent rent side, which is the lagging indicator, but on the leading side. The Fed's so far willing to accept that. But that darn wage inflation seems to be propped up. Propped up by something. Maybe politically motivated? Who knows? It certainly looks a lot better to say jobs are growing under my administration than to actually tell the truth. But it is possible that, yeah, maybe stimmy checks from some states, specifically California, sending stimulus inflation relief checks to people making up to $500,000 could have propped up some jobs. We also know that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has given us a really misleading read on jobs. If you remember, about 13 days ago on December 2nd, I made a video and I talked about how, isn't it odd that between March and November, the Household Survey of Employment, which doesn't double count employees, only grew by 12,000 jobs, but the Establishment Survey grew by 2.5 million jobs. How could that be? Maybe because one of the surveys is actually reporting the potential payroll count that companies have, where the household survey counts people employed. So if one person has 2 jobs, they get double counted, right? And so that has led to this sort of annual graph with a massive divergence. This is a zero hedge chart here giving us a nice little graphic. And they show this divergence between the surveys. It's almost like something broke in March, also conveniently somewhat right before the election. But either way, no tinfoil hat necessary. There's obviously a problem here. Something's changed. For some reason, the surveys are no longer aligning the way they used to. Possibly because starting in that time, people started getting multiple jobs just to pay the bills because inflation was running so hot, right? And people are starting to have a harder time getting a new job. Okay, all right, to some degree, maybe that makes sense. But so far, the Federal Reserve has not acknowledged this problem. The Federal Reserve has instead said, wage growth is still going up, employment is still tight. And we just have to keep being aggressive and keep hiking until, unfortunately, that goes down. There's going to be joblessness, probably over 1.5 million people are going to lose their jobs. And we wish there was a less painful way, but this is what we have to do. That's what Jerome Powell told us in the meeting yesterday. Well, what did we actually just get from the Philadelphia Federal Reserve, which Jerome Powell may not have actually seen yet before his meeting, but just came out? Take a look at this. Early benchmark revisions of state payroll employment by the research department of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. And what does this bank tell us? Well, they tell us the following. Estimates by the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia indicate that employment changes from March through June. Keep this in mind, that's March through June. We're in December, okay? So they're just now realizing that, wait a second, why is there such a divergence? And March through June is just this section highlighted here, right? This is a March through June chart. Wanted to make that clear to you. Because remember when I said March through November, we were at like a 2.7 million job gap, okay? Just in the March through June section, we're sitting at a 1.5 million job differential, approximately, okay? The point is not exactly that the numbers are perfect, it's just to show that there's a huge gap between the two. And the Philly Fed is going, hey, we just did our analysis of the March through June numbers, and they are significantly different than the estimates in 33 states and in DC compared with estimates from the Bureau of Labor Statistics Current Employment Statistics report. In fact, our early reports estimate that there are higher changes in 4 states but lower changes in 29 states, where essentially our estimates now incorporate more comprehensive, accurate job estimates released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics quarterly report along with their own data versus their monthly payroll report. So in other words, the Philly Fed is saying, look, the month-over-month data, we're not really trusting these BLS reports right now. Let's look at the quarterly data and include some of our own data in it together so we can interpret this, right? This is their methodology. You won't believe what they found the difference was. So in that initial estimate chart, we saw that there was this weird difference of potentially as much as 1.5 million, but it certainly was a big difference. It certainly seemed like the household survey was saying very few jobs, if any jobs, were actually created. So ignore the difference for a moment. We just know it's huge, and we actually think that basically nearly no jobs have been created. That's because you kind of go from March over to June, and you're roughly at the same level. So no jobs have been created based on the household survey. But the payroll survey says over 1 million jobs were created. Well, what did the Philadelphia Fed just research and find out per their methodology? Well, the following. They say that in aggregate, in total, we believe only 10,500 net new jobs were added during the period of March through June, rather than the 1.1 million jobs estimated by the sum of the states. In other words, the Philadelphia Fed is saying we think there was zero jobs growth. Basically, that's what they write here, zero, with 10,000 is pretty dang close to zero in the case of this jobs report relative to 1 million to 1.5 million, right? So they write here, based on our research, we're actually sitting at about a 0% jobs growth solely for March through June. And by the way, because it takes us so long to figure this crap out, it's going to be another 3 months before we can let you know what the actual job gains were between June and September. So in other words, we're probably going to be in February, towards the end of February, before we actually have real data for June through September for the jobs report. And this June through December jobs information, which seems terribly wrong, is what the Fed is using to justify continuing to hike. In other words, we need to ask ourselves, when is the Fed actually going to wake up and realize that they are hiking rates based on this expectation, that the establishment survey is growing between March and November 2.7 million jobs. When we only look at the household survey, we're actually growing 12,000 jobs, which is basically, for this purposes here, when we're looking at 12,000 versus 2.7, basically zero. When is the Fed actually going to wake up and realize this? And that's actually very interesting, because as soon as the Fed realizes, we should probably be using the household report, what do we have? Well, what were the 3 things I mentioned? Goods inflation, check, going down. Housing service inflation makes up about 45% of PCE, going down. We see that with new lease signings plummeting. Lennar writing down their backlog by over 24%. Seeing potentially over 9.5% sequential quarter-over-quarter real estate price declines, expecting no appreciation in 2023. Huge numbers, right? What's the third thing? Just regular service jobs make up the other about 55%. And if we're actually creating way fewer jobs, then wage growth should also be plummeting, which actually means we should be seeing not 1 down arrow for inflation, not 2 down arrows for inflation, but 3 down arrows for inflation. The Fed's got to wake up and actually realize, wait a minute, not only do we need to stop the most aggressive interest rate hiking in 40 years, and not only do we need to conduct that pause, but we're probably not going to be able to pause for more than a meeting or 2 without risking the US economy dropping into a deep, dark, dirty depression. So we're going to actually have to U-turn fast, because the data the Fed is using, once again, is looking in the rearview mirror or is just straight up wrong. Whether it's wrong for political reasons or speed reasons or incompetence, who knows? But this is the same thing that happened in reverse when inflation was starting to rise and the Fed called it initially transitory. The Fed needed to act sooner. I think everybody can say that in hindsight now. The Fed needed to act sooner to get inflation down. They waited way too long. they were still printing money. This is like the most offensive part to me, okay? I get it. Like, there was a belief that inflation was going to be transitory for a while, and I think in 2030, when we look back, we'll look back at 2021, 2, 3, maybe 3.5, right, as a period of transitory inflation, right? But saying that used to be an excuse for the Fed to not do anything. And instead, they were still printing money. And they were still printing money in March of 2022, when inflation was over 7%. How could you imagine that today, still printing money? That'd be like sending stimulus checks like California. Very stupid. But that was what they were doing. So they stopped way too late. So we're dealing with this garbage. Now they're overdoing it in the other direction. They're going too far, and they're causing too much pain for too long. And the more they do this, the more they'll actually have to reduce rates and potentially turn the money printer right back on. And at some point, they'll find an equilibrium. But right now, I can tell you, it certainly feels like, based on the data we're seeing, the Fed is overdoing it. And that could set the stage for substantial rate cuts in 2023. And we believe, just like the bond market believes, that the Fed is bluffing when they say we're not even thinking about rate cuts in 2023. Now, that could be true. They could be saying, yeah, let's not talk about rate cuts just yet. We don't want any leaks around here. Let's keep markets down a little bit longer, huh? A little bit more time to buy the dip, huh? Rate cuts are coming. Prepare.